Ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode, we take a hard look at the rising cost of tungsten. We talk about some of the most overrated bait companies in the fishing industry. We have fresh Major League Fishing results, and we answer your questions about wading in gross water, rod weights, and more on today's episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast. Brought to you by The Rod Locker. Premium gear and expert advice from a staff you can trust. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Tackle Talk Podcast. I appreciate you joining us today. Before we get into the episode, we have to give a big shout out to the folks that make not only this episode, but this entire podcast possible, The Rod Locker. The Rod Locker is a great family-owned Midwestern tackle shop based right there in Southern Indiana that has an awesome selection of both new and lightly used fishing gear. Their used section is one of those things that just sets them apart from everybody else in the country. We're talking hundreds of lightly used rods or reels, most of which you get in the mail and don't look like they were used like hardly at all. I can't tell you how many times I have seen used gear from the Rod Locker show up and it looks almost brand spanking new. And you save a ton of money, not just regular price, but they also do awesome sales on their used gear all the time too. So check their Facebook page for their Wild Card Wednesdays that they drop usually in the middle of the day on Wednesday, where they actually pick like a couple rods and a couple reels and they run extra discounts on those and they actually walk you through each of those models. So be sure to check them out on social media because they drop those all the time. It's also worth mentioning that you should probably become a platinum member with the Rod Locker because you get free shipping with no minimums. You get boosted rewards on every single purchase that you make. So that credit that you get to use at the Rod Locker after all of those sales just gets more and more and more. I've got so much free gear from the Rod Locker because of the points that I've accumulated over the years. So go check them out over at www.rodlocker.com. And as always, you can use our code TackleTalkMay. That's going to save you an extra 5% on your order, almost everything on that website. Use that code anytime you check out to save an extra 5% just for being a Tackle Talk listener. We appreciate you. The Rod Locker appreciates you. Again, go check them out, www.rodlocker.com, and use code TackleTalkMay. All right, first up, really quickly here, we have some fast results from Major League Fishing as they just wrapped up the Yuengling Light Lager Stage 5 at Beaver Lake. First off, shout out to Major League Fishing. I mean, I know it probably has a lot to do with who owns them, Kroenke Sports, but they do a pretty good job with the non-endemic sponsors and not just having fishing companies be sponsors. And that's been like the tough part of fishing for the past 5 or 10 years is trying to get sponsorship money from outside of fishing. So Yuengling Light Lager Stage 5 at Beaver Lake, certainly a non-endemic sponsor for Stage 5 here for Major League Fishing. But this just wrapped up. It was April 30th through May 3rd in Rogers, Arkansas. And your top 10 here, 10th place was Marshall Robinson, 9th place Ron Nelson, 8th was Jacob Wheeler, 7th Drew Gill, 6th place Anthony Gagliardi, 5th place Spencer Sheffield, 4th place Zach Burge, 3rd Banks Shaw, 2nd place Wesley Strader, and 1st place Cole Floyd. And you want to talk about a great finish to this event. The top 2 anglers here, Wesley Strader and Cole Floyd, kind of ran away with this thing. Wesley Strader finished with 55 pounds and 2 ounces. Cole Floyd finishes with 56 pounds even. And Wesley Strader caught 23 fish. Cole Floyd caught 24. So you are talking about the separation of 1 fish and like 14 ounces between 1st and 2nd place here at Beaver Lake. So congratulations to Cole Floyd, an Ohio boy from Leesburg, Ohio. You love to see that. But Cole Floyd is your champion from Stage 5 of the Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour in 2026. Okay, let's keep the episode rolling here. The next thing I want to talk about for a second is tungsten. And we all know over the last, I don't know, call it 5 to 15 years, tungsten has been the premium, trendy, and rightfully so, upgrade to lead in use of like jigs and all kinds of weights, from flipping weights to worm weights to nail weights to internal weight transfer balls and rattles. Like a lot of that uses tungsten for like premium components. And we have tungsten flipping jigs. We have tungsten chatterbaits now. We have tungsten stick-on weights for hard baits so that you can re-weight them to your like desired weighting. So if you're trying to get something to suspend or something, tungsten has really become mainstream, especially in the past like 5 to 7 years, I would say. Well, now we're hitting a very real tipping point in the world of tungsten. So much so that I kind of feel like waving the doomsday flag here for a second and just kind of getting it off my chest of what I feel like I've been seeing over the past probably month or two. So I did some research last week because I knew how rough it was getting out there in the tungsten market, but I don't think I fully understood just how bad it really was. And so I had some people smarter than me try to crunch some numbers, and I did my own research, and I just want to share some things that I found with you all today about this very important material that we use in fishing. So I will preface this by saying that a lot of this is coming from my brain, which knows nothing about the raw materials markets and geopolitical, raw material trade, agreements, tariffs, supply chains. Like, I'm a dummy when it comes to all that kind of stuff. I just kind of smile and go to the store and go online and order my gear. And then I don't really understand how it gets to my door. I'm just sort of blissfully unaware of that part of things and what goes on behind the scenes. But I tried my very best to do my own research. And then with the help of a few other people who provided some numbers, I tried to compile things into just something we could have a conversation about really fast. And the main point of this is to show you the price increase in tungsten over the past couple years and to kind of warn you about what we could be looking at in the future of fishing tackle. So I went back like 3 years ago because I felt like that was a good time to start if we want to look at like some base pricing of tungsten, because that would have been like 3 years after COVID. So hopefully, your markets had stabilized, but it's also 3 years before now when everything started to get so volatile and go crazy like by the day. So I didn't want to go pre-COVID because overall inflation is so different from 7 years ago for every product, not just tungsten. So I felt like 2023 would be kind of a good baseline for tungsten pricing. You can tell me I'm wrong. You're probably right if you say I'm wrong, but that's just what I did. It made sense in my brain. So I wanted to examine how much, for instance, the cost has gone up to produce like a 1/4 ounce flipping weight made out of tungsten. I feel like that's a pretty normal thing that a lot of us use. Not a very big piece of tungsten at all. Very kind of small, middle of the road tungsten tackle that a lot of us probably have used over the years. So a 1/4 ounce flipping weight, not a big weight at all. I wanted to use that as an example of how much the pricing has gone up from 2023 to today. So let's start with some basic math. A 1/4 ounce bullet weight weighs something like 7.09 grams. And then if we talk about like tungsten alloy, which is what people use to make fishing weights, like fishing weights aren't 100% tungsten. They're usually something like 90+%. So I went with like 6.5 to 6.8 grams of raw tungsten material needed to make that 1/4 ounce bullet weight. Not the full 7.09 grams because, like I said, it's not pure tungsten. So I went 6.5 to 6.8 as a range of raw material you would need to buy. And then if we look at pricing, in 2023, that tungsten alloy powder that you use to make fishing weights was like $20 to $45 per kilogram from what I could find. So your cost per gram is something like 2 to 5 cents, meaning that the raw tungsten that you would need to produce a 1/4 ounce weight at the time would cost you like 13 to 30 cents for that 1/4 ounce bullet weight. And that makes sense to me. If you call it on the high side, like 30 cents, then that company's paying shipping, packaging, all of their overhead, and you sell it for like 80 cents or $1 a piece or something, I don't know, then you have a decent profit margin, but it's not something that's obscene. So normal product, normal price, normal margin. Now, if we fast forward to today in 2026, I found pricing for like $180 to $300 per kilogram in some spots. So I don't know the accuracy of this stuff. I'm sure people have different suppliers and it's changing by the day. So someone can tell me how accurate or inaccurate those numbers are. But let's just go with what I found. So $180 to $300 per kilogram versus the $20 to $45 per kilogram the price was 3 years ago. So folks, that's like 10 times the price that it was in 2023. So if you make that same 1/4 ounce tungsten flipping weight with current pricing, you're at about 18 to 30 cents per gram instead of that 2 to 5 cents from before. So now that quarter ounce bullet weight doesn't cost you 13 to 30 cents to make like it did in 2023. Now that same bullet weight costs like $1.15 to $3 just to produce for one single quarter ounce flipping weight. So if you take the average there and you call it $2 a piece now and call it 20 cents back in 2023, that's like a 900% increase. 20 cents to make a weight in 2023, $2 to make that weight now. That is insanity. And the crazy part right now is the markets are going so nuts. I'm sure there are days where it costs more than that to produce. And the pricing and the supply is so volatile right now that I'm sure just doing business in tungsten and that market in general is virtually impossible. And then if you lock in all of your pricing for like a product and you're buying, 6 months worth of inventory and company A gets it for, one price, company B gets it for a different price 2 days later. Well, now they're stuck with what they paid pricing wise for that inventory for the next 6 months or whatever order supply they made. And so they're stuck with that pricing, and their price they're passing along to you has to reflect that. So that's probably why you're seeing so many companies have such different pricing in tungsten right now. It depends on when they bought that inventory. And like I said, it's changing by the day. So I bring that up because I want to pose a very, very important question. Is tungsten still a viable option for the future production of fishing tackle? Because at current prices, I would argue that it's not. If it costs $2 for a company to make a weight, and again, this is like my harebrained math, so I could be off on this, but I don't think I'm terribly wrong here, even if the numbers aren't perfect. The sentiment of this is still true, is you have a material that is now so volatile and the price fluctuates so badly, and it's such an in-demand commodity at this point that now it's 10 times plus more expensive than it used to be just a few years ago. You have to ask yourself if it's still a viable option to bank on for the next 10 to 20 years of fishing lures. Because I'm not paying $4 for a quarter ounce flipping weight that used to cost me 80 cents to buy. I'm not going to do it. I will go back to lead. I will pay 10 to 20 cents per weight for lead versus $4 if you're giving me the choice for that same weight in tungsten. When it was a difference of 20 cents to 80 cents, I could maybe make that swing. From 20 cents to $4, now we're talking a line that I am not willing to cross. And I guarantee I'm not the only one that thinks like this. Like right now, I am looking at my computer. I am clicking on like Reaction Tackle's website. That's a tackle website that sells tungsten. A 6-pack of 3/8 ounce flipping weights, the size that I normally use like in my everyday regular flipping brush piles and stuff. I love 3/8. A 6-pack of 3/8 ounce tungsten weights is $40. That is $6.67 a piece. That is insanity. And if you go to someone else like NACO, I think is how you say it, NAKO, I've seen them kind of in comments recently saying, well, our tungsten is still pretty affordable. If you go to their website, the same 3/8 ounce tungsten weights that we were just talking about in a 5-pack, so not a 6-pack, a 5-pack, are still $24.49. So that is almost $5 a piece for a 3/8 ounce flipping tungsten weight. That is madness. I don't care if it's $5, $6 a piece. It is way, way, way too expensive for your regular Joe at this point. So the question remains, is tungsten about to go the way of the dodo bird? At that price, for me, it is. I can assure you that I will go right back to flipping a 3/8 ounce lead worm weight for that price. I'm not paying $5 to $6 a weight. I just can't do it. I'm a regular guy with a regular job, regular expenses. I'm not spending $6 per weight for a 3/8 ounce flipping weight. So the next question you should probably ask is, all right, well, if tungsten goes away, what material should we be using? Is there like a middle ground between tungsten and lead? So I tried my best to do my own research into that realm. And the problem is there really isn't a next best option. There's not like a, next man up material that we can just switch to. The closest thing that I could find that would be like a little bit more dense than lead, but less expensive than tungsten was like bismuth. But bismuth has a lot of problems for production of fishing tackle. One, it's hard to pour because it expands when it cools. So you have a lot of problems with molds and with products sticking and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that easy to pour and it's not easy for bait makers to work with. You also break a lot more weights versus just denting or scratching them because bismuth is a lot more brittle than lead or tungsten. So you get a lot of breakage, which we don't really have to deal with either lead or tungsten because both of them take damage pretty good and they don't actually break apart. They just dent or scratch or something like that. And then bismuth has a tendency to have rough and sharp edges, which then cause all kinds of problems with like line fraying and breaking off and all of that. So bismuth probably isn't our answer long term. And honestly, I don't know what is. So I guess my like not so hot take here would be that I think we're going to see the pendulum swing back to lead in the coming years unless tungsten prices significantly drop and stabilize. But even then, I think this past, couple months has shown you just how volatile this material can be and how the market can be. And I just don't know if you can bank on, even if it does go back to stable for the next couple months, is it going to stay that way for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years? I just think it's shown its ability to not be counted on long term because you can't start a company or invest in a company and know that at any given moment, the material that you're usually buying for your normal margins is going to go up 10x. That's just not a realistic business plan to bank on something like tungsten. I think tungsten over the past, couple months has really shown its true colors as being too unstable to rely on in the future. So, I mean, if it were me, I would not be putting my trust in tungsten long term in terms of product development and trying to bring things to market at certain price points. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second because it seems like that has been percolating for a while and we all know that the pricing is nuts, but it's really gotten bad over the past couple weeks. And I think it's really priced out most everyday regular anglers that were sacking up and buying tungsten products and making that stretch and saying, okay, yes, if a tungsten weight is twice the price or 3 times the price of the same thing in lead, maybe I can make that switch. But if we're talking the difference between like a 20-cent product and a $4 product and something that you have to buy like 10 or 20 of at a time to stock your tackle box, that's something that I'm not willing to do. So as much as I love my tungsten weights and my tungsten jigs, for the time being, I am being forced to go back to purchasing lead products. And if things don't change, I think lead could ironically go back to being kind of the future choice for fishing weights, for jigs, for internal weighting, all of that kind of stuff once again. So time will tell, I guess, but I just figured it would be worth exploring today on the show, the kind of woes lately of tungsten. All right, let's keep rolling here. We are going to get into the fishing poll here in just a second. We do have a fun one this week. But first, the Tackle Talk podcast and the fishing poll are brought to you in part by Humminbird. And right now, you can save up to $300 off a brand new Humminbird Explore unit and $200 off Mega Live 2 over on the Humminbird website. So the Explore units are their wildly popular new line of graphs. They're offered in 9-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch models. They've got full HD displays with really nice responsive touchscreens. You can get them with a transducer so that you already have Mega side imaging and Mega down imaging good to go. You get internal GPS and Humminbird base map. And with that, you have the charts and maps of over 10,000 lakes in the United States alone, with depth markers, contours, hazards, and a ton more already included and loaded on those units. And those Explore units pair really nicely with Humminbird Mega Live 2, which is their all-in-one live sonar transducer, which, by the way, doesn't require any sort of black box or additional units to store like some of the other competitors do, which is really nice for you kayak folks out there. And both of those are on sale right now on the Humminbird website, and you can take advantage of this limited time offer by heading over to humminbird.com. The Tackle Talk podcast is also brought to you in part by Minn Kota. And the last time I checked, I think there were like 21 different Minn Kota motors and trolling motors to choose from over on the Minn Kota website. They've got options from 12 volt all the way up to 36 volt. They've got bow mount or transom mount options. You can get shaft lengths from like 30 to 100 inches. The possibilities are endless with Minn Kota. But the cool part is they have something for any budget. So you can get into something like a Minn Kota Edge trolling motor for a few $100, all the way up to like the top of the line Altera. So go see for yourself all of the options for your next boat or kayak build over at www.minnkotamotors.com.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Fishing Poll. Brought to you by Minn Kota. Adventure awaits at Minn-Kota.com.
All right, let's jump into this fishing poll. This is a doozy. We have a fun question that I posed to you all over the past week. I'm sure this is going to get contentious, which is a good thing. I think good fishing poll questions should get a little bit contentious. But this week's question was, who is the most overrated tackle company? And then I specifically said, like in parentheses, I said, we're talking baits here. We're not talking rods. We're not talking reels, bait companies. Who is the most overrated bait company? Now, here's the challenging part with something being overrated is by definition, that thing also has to be popular. So if it's not popular, it's hard to be overrated. I mean, Merriam-Webster right here defines overrated as being rated or valued too high. And to be popular or to be valued high, that means that there is going to be a large group of the public that does very much like that particular thing. And in this case, it's fishing brands. So that's why overrated is such a fun concept to me, because it forces you to say, hey, a lot of people really like this thing, but I don't, and here's why. You kind of have to be contrarian a little bit, which I think makes things fun. So the big question, who do you think is the most overrated bait company out there? Now, there's three, I would say, right now that come to mind off the top of my head. One is a little bit of a legacy brand. One is a trendy, I would say relatively new-ish company. And the other one is like a JDM brand. So let's start with the legacy company. I'm actually going to say Yamamoto. I just think Yamamoto, for what they are very overrated. Because in most cases, if we want to take like their most popular product, a stick bait is a stick bait to me. I don't need a Yamamoto Senko most of the time. I throw all kinds of Senko style baits. I throw Yum Dingers, I throw BPS Stickos, I throw Berkeley Generals, Z-Man Zinkers. I mean, there are a ton of stick bait options out there. Heck, I used to pour my own stick baits back in the day. I think Gary Yamamoto rightfully gets a lot of credit for creating the Senko style bait years ago, but in today's bait landscape, Yamamoto is just another brand to me. They have fairly generic looking baits. They have a lot of the same shapes that everybody else has now. They are kind of in that sort of copycat game a little bit and just trying to stay on top of trends. And they do look fairly generic. And like a lot of these brands that are overrated, I'm not saying that they're bad. I mean, they make good products, but I think they are put on a little too high of a pedestal currently because of their past. So I'm going to say Yamamoto is going to make my list here. The newer company that I think fits this mold for being overrated in the current marketplace is 6th Sense Fishing. 6th Sense is a very, very hypey brand. They rely pretty heavily on their online army, their flashy digital marketing, and you do have to tip your hat to them in that arena. I think their brand team does a really good job. They have an identity, they have a look, they have a feel. When you see a 6th Sense ad or marketing, it is very 6th Sense. Now, I would say they've gotten away from that a little bit over the past couple months because now most of their ads are just kind of AI slop and I hate them. And they've gotten away from what made 6th Sense cool in the first place, which was like really good photography, that dark, kind of moody look to everything that they did. I loved their marketing if you want to go back like 2 or 3 years ago. Now, like I said, it's just AI slop that they're posting all the time and it's terrible. But they have done a really good job over the years as a whole of having a good marketing strategy and identity and look to what they're doing. But purely on the product side, I've never been overly impressed with 6th Sense Fishing. I said this a few weeks ago and I do stand by it. 6th Sense seems like one of those companies that throws a lot of stuff at the wall just to see what sticks without a ton of discretion about what does or doesn't make it to the market. I think they just seem to release things too fast, too often. And because of that, a lot of their products do become kind of stinker products out there. Now, they do have some great baits, but their hit rate isn't exactly 100%. Like there are some companies out there that I think take their time and really vet products that they release because it is their image and their product they want to protect. 6th Sense takes, it seems like, the polar opposite approach. I mean, the just pretty wild inconsistencies in the actions of some of their hard baits, I would say they have some durability issues with some of their soft plastics. I just feel like a lot of their products are rushed to put out to market. So I just think they're a company that I would give their marketing team like, a B, but I would actually give their product development and what they come to market with a C or D a lot of times. And then if we get to the third one that kind of came to mind really fast, I think it's hard to say that there is a company out there that is more hyped right now, and thus I think maybe more overrated than HideUp. Because anytime you've got people lining up to pay $20+ for a tiny piece of soft plastic that looks like a ball, and then they are legitimately reselling them online for $80 to $120 a piece. I mean, you can go look at eBay and actually click the sales and the actual sold listings. So not what people are listing them for and asking them for, what they're actually selling for. They are selling for $80 to $120 a piece on eBay if you go look. So it's just nuts that they're actually selling for that price. And I just think there is not a single brand right now that is more overrated at the moment than HideUp, because it's just the herd mob mentality. It is that pandemonium, and it's what makes people spend stupid money on stupid things without thinking about it because everybody else is. I think HideUp is a great example of that right now with the Koiki. Now, I don't care how good your soft plastic is, a single soft plastic bait is not worth $100 a piece. It's not worth a fifth of that at MSRP even, at least to me. So I think people are losing their minds just because it's kind of the cool thing of the moment. And you're probably going to have a lot of buyers regret if you look back 2 years from now and you say, why was I paying $100 for that tiny little plastic ball? So HideUp and the Koiki and the rest of their really weird baits like their fish ball, the Koiki shrimp, they're just overpriced, silly looking baits that even if they do work are not worth the price that the primary or especially the secondary market are charging right now. So I think at this very specific moment, HideUp has to be on that list too. And then if you go down, I'm sure there are going to be other very, very popular answers that you guys are going to submit. I think Guggen is probably going to be on this list a lot, and maybe rightfully so. But I'm not putting Guggen on my overrated list because I feel like Guggen has had such a fall from grace in the bait world over the past couple years that I think they are about adequately rated these days. I think most people have seen through the Guggen facade at this point, and their time atop the fishing world is kind of over. Like in their heyday, I actually think they were probably rated pretty accurately. Like they did come out with a strong, first 5 or 6 soft plastics when they came out with them way back in the day. So the, trench hog, the bandito bug, that whole first wave of Guggen baits, I think they did a decent job with that initial launch. Their branding was great. I think they just kind of zeroed in on 5 or 6 different shapes that were kind of unique. And even though they had some durability issues, I think that it was at least a good first rollout of baits and it wasn't egregious by any means. But then they very quickly sold out to cheap production of hard baits and wire baits and jigs, and they just had them produced very, very cheaply through, I think it was Ketchco or MTB or someone like that, and then they just slapped their name on it to capitalize on that Guggen wave that was happening at that point. And those hard baits were, and still are, I guess, atrocious. They're not good. The clickbait might be the worst bait brought to market in the past 10 years. It's got to be up there. Their jerk baits suck. Their frog sucks. I think they have burned a lot of people out with their bad baits, their bad rods, their bad reels. And obviously they targeted a younger audience. And I think everybody knows that by now. I think that Guggen's spot in the industry is probably about where it should be now. It's just cheap, below average baits that are marketed to a younger audience that enjoys watching their videos. So I think that's just what Guggen is now. And most people know that. So my picks personally are probably going to be Yamamoto, 6 Sense Fishing, and then a big emphasis on HideUp currently. But I think that the hype and the fad will pass on that one. Now, boom, boom, boom. Here's where it gets fun because I'm about to click this button and I'm about to see what you all said for your most overrated bait brands on the market. So clicking here and okay, right off the bat, it looks like the results here of the top 5 answers, I guess we'll start there. I think I largely agree with these. So your number 1 answer for the fishing poll this week was 6 Sense Fishing by quite a bit. And that's interesting to me because I probably would have guessed Guggen would have been number 1, but 6 Sense is easily your number 1 answer with 30.3% of the vote. So So almost 1 out of 3 responses here said 6 Sense Fishing. And we've got hundreds of responses in this fishing poll. Number 2 was Guggen at 21.21%. So if you add those up, over half of the responses out of, again, hundreds and hundreds of responses here went to those 2 companies, 6 Sense and Guggen. And I think those are fair. I'm not going to argue with either of those. Now, number 3 is interesting because your number 3 answer was Megabass with 15.1% of the vote. Now, I will kind of agree and disagree a little bit with this one here. I disagree because I think you can attribute probably 75% of the Megabass love and fandom and fanboys out there to their jerkbaits. And I think that's fair because I would not call the Vision 110 overrated. As much time as I've put in with jerkbaits over the past 10 plus years, the Vision 110 is the gold standard of suspending jerkbaits. So I don't consider that line of baits, like the 110 line and their jerkbait line, as overrated. I think they're pretty appropriately rated, but there are a ton of other baits in the Megabass lineup that aren't that great. A good example would be like the Pop Max or the Pop X. Those are not that special. I don't think a Pop Max is worth $22. I'm buying a Rico 10 times out of 10 before I pay that price for a Megabass Pop Max, for instance. I think some of their soft plastics are pretty meh, like the Sleeper Gill and the Sleeper Craw are both not great baits. The Haze Dong is honestly not that great of a bait. They're so brittle. They are not durable at all. They're like 1 or 2 fish baits. As a guy that loves glide baits, I would say that the Eye Slide is overrated for sure. I would say Spark Shads aren't as special as people make them out to be. So I do agree there are a lot of baits that are not worthy of the overall Megabass hype. But on the other hand, their jerk baits are so good that they probably make up for a lot of the other baits combined, in my opinion. But I have no problem with Megabass being on this list because you have people like lining up for hours to get a certain color of Megabass baits, or they're paying $100 for some, Megabass hat that has some special patch on it or something. Like, the fanboys are nuts for Megabass. So I guess I probably do agree with them being on this list. That's a good choice. Number 4 here on your list with 7.58% of the vote was Berkley. Now, again, I'm fine with Berkley being on this list. I think they are one of the most popular and highest grossing sales bait companies out there in the industry. So if you don't love Berkley, then putting them on this list makes a ton of sense. I personally do really like Berkley baits, just as a guy that's pretty cost conscious. Berkley makes affordable stuff that I do frequently buy and use. My favorite plastics of all time are the Pit Boss. Those are made by Berkley. I do really like their Power Blade spinner baits. Like, those have become one of my favorite spinner baits as of late. Their soft plastic glides are pretty nice for the price. Choppos are a great alternative to Whopper Ploppers at a better price. The Swamp Lord that they came out with a couple of years ago is pretty decent. So there are things that I do like from Berkley, but then there are things that I don't like from Berkley. I think the Slobber Knocker is probably one of the worst bladed jigs on the market. I don't like Slobber Knockers. I don't like the Gilly. The Kredge, as much as I wanted to like it when it came out, wasn't my favorite. Yeah, there's a ton of baits that definitely fall into the category of baits I don't love from Berkley as well. So Berkley was your number 4 choice, and then your number 5 choice was Yamamoto at 6.06%, which we already talked about, and I definitely agree with Yamamoto being on this list, especially for the price they charge for some of their baits. So then from there, you have a ton of different answers that are in that like 3% or under range. Strike King is heavy on this list, which is actually a sneaky good answer, I think, especially as of late. Z-Man is on this list as well, which I'll kind of give Z-Man a pass a little bit just because of the Chatterbait and Elastec alone. The next one down here is Lunker Hunt at like 2%. Yeah, Lunker Hunt is terrible stuff. I don't know if they're popular enough to be considered overrated, but yeah, I mean, Lunker Hunt is not great in my mind. The next one down here in terms of percentages was G-Crack. And then you get Depths, Yum, Working Class Zero, Savage Gear, Yozuri, Rapala, River to Sea, Bull Shad, and then there are a ton of more down below like 1% as well. But if you want to recap your top 5 here really fast, the number 1 answer this week for the most overrated bait company was 6 Sense Fishing. Number 2 answer was Guggen. Number 3 answer was Megabass. Number 4 went to Berkley, and rounding out your top 5 of most overrated bait companies was Yamamoto. All right. And finally, here we are going to end this week's show with the mailbag in just a second. But first, the Tackle Talk podcast and the mailbag are powered by Amped Outdoors. And Amped Outdoors is an industry leader in lithium batteries, engineered and built for all kinds of marine applications. We're talking trolling motors, we're talking graphs, live sonar, ice fishing, kayak motors, you name it, Amped has a battery for you. And with Amped, you get the highest quality components, you get waterproof case designs, and for their bigger batteries, you get Bluetooth connectivity and heated charging standard. And you get all of that plus a 10-year no-gimmick warranty and world-class customer support based right here in the United States in Hudson, Wisconsin. And I've been running these batteries really hard the past year, and the added tech of Bluetooth and heated charging alone has been a godsend, on top of them just being incredibly reliable and affordable batteries that cost like half the price of the batteries that I used to buy. So I cannot recommend these enough. Great people, a great company, great products from the folks over at Amped Outdoors. So you can head over to www.ampedoutdoors.com and take a look for yourself at the tons of different models and options they offer at incredible prices. Again, great lithiums, great prices over at www.ampedoutdoors.com.
This is the Tackle Talk podcast mailbag, powered by Amped Outdoors, your source for premium, affordable lithium batteries.
All right, our first question here in the mailbag today is from Tom, who says, Tom here from Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. I'm getting into both fly fishing and spin fishing with my sons, and we're having a lot of fun learning together. We live about a mile walk through the woods to the Potomac River, and I had some plans to go bank fishing with them when the weather gets nicer. Unfortunately, where we are on the Potomac is where there has been an ongoing sewage spill. This gives me the willies as a low-grade germaphobe, and I don't want to take my family into a spot where we could get sick. My question is, how do you evaluate water quality before fishing? Do you have any go-to precautions or steps that you're taking to make sure if it's safe or unsafe to wade in? Do you worry about, even if you're upstream of a bad spot, that the fish might have been contaminated during their day-to-day travels? Thanks for the awesome podcast. Love listening to it with my sons, and thanks for putting together an interesting, informative, and soothing podcast. Tom. Well, I think that might be the first time anybody's ever called this soothing, so I appreciate that, I guess. It makes me kind of laugh, too. My dad told me a couple years ago, he's like, I like to put on that show that you do, and then I fall right asleep. And I was like, well, thanks, Dad. I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess maybe the show is a little soothing to some people, but thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. This is a really interesting one because I love wet wading. And the thing that comes to mind here is I probably do not have enough precautions when it comes to where I do and don't wet wade. And obviously with wet wading, we're not even talking putting waders on. I'm talking getting in shorts and an old pair of tennis shoes or an old pair of wading boots and just going. So yes, if that water is gross or contaminated or has any sort of issue to it, I'm a sitting duck. I'm just going to get it. I'm going to get sick or something's going to happen. And that's happened to me before. Here in Dayton, Ohio, our rivers are pretty gross, especially our main river. And if you go downtown in urban areas, you are wading through trash. So it is disgusting, but you have to do it for the fish. And I've gotten sick from the river before. A funny story that I probably never told on this show before, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I don't get sick. I don't throw up. I don't take sick days. I probably since 2013, when I started working where I work now, I may have taken one sick day my entire life. So I do not get sick, or at least not sick enough to stop me from doing my normal day-to-day stuff. But I got really sick 7 or 8 years ago. I was throwing up. I had a fever. I was just disgusting and I could not shake it. And so I finally went to the urgent care here. You just pay your little $20 copay. You go sit in the room with all the other people that are sick. And then some nurse practitioner or something prescribes you a Z-Pack and then you're good to go. One of those type of places. And I went in and I was like, I just feel terrible and I don't know what it is. And so they did one of those, I think it was a strep swab and where they test for a whole bunch of other stuff. And they came back 30 minutes later and they said, well, we know what it is, but it's something that we don't see too often. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And they said it was, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I think they called it giardia or giardiasis or something like that. And I was like, well, okay, I've never heard of that. And they go, well, the common name for it is beaver fever. And I was like, okay. I still don't know what this is or where I would have got it from. And they're like, what have you been doing? And I was like, I don't know, nothing out of the ordinary. And like, were you anywhere where you could have been like around contaminated water or feces or anything like that? And I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, obviously I wade through like the grossest water around in Dayton, Ohio. Yeah, I fish a lot and I wet wade and I'm in some pretty gross areas. And they're like, well, that would explain it. And so, yeah, I had to take some medicine and stuff for it. But yeah, I got beaver fever from the Dayton rivers around here. So yes, I've had my fair share of run-ins with like, sickness or gross water, but it was just like normal grossness. So if I was in your situation and I knew that a body of water had been contaminated, yeah, I would make sure that I'm wading above that. So the nice part is you are on the Potomac. The Potomac does have good flow to it. As long as you're above where that sewage was, I would think that you're fine, especially now. Like, I wouldn't be worried too much about the fish being contaminated or anything like that, unless you're eating them, which you're probably not eating them. So I think you're probably okay there. Just stay above where that leak or broken pipe or whatever it was. And I think you're totally fine there. So yeah, the real thing that I watch when I'm wet wading is weather. Because when you're wading, like stuff can change very, very quickly, especially small creeks. If you're in a small creek and you get some heavy, heavy rain north of you, that flow can change so drastically. I got hung out to dry one time because it stormed above where I was wading and I didn't even realize it. And that creek started rising as I was in it and it was kind of sketchy. So yeah, I pay attention to weather more than anything else. But in your situation, yes, I probably would stay above where that sewage leak was in the Potomac. Other than that, even if you do have like some spills or things like that, because it's moving water, I feel like that stuff clears out pretty quickly. All right, the next question here is from Scott, who says, I know this is pretty subjective, but you always manage to make any question interesting. So, do you believe most bodies of water have at least one big fish in them? I recently spent a weekend at an Airbnb with an 8-acre pond. It was full of large bluegill and small largemouth. We went the whole weekend catching 8 to 10-inch bass pretty much on every other cast. Zero fish over 12 inches. However, I did get a clear look at a largemouth cruising the bank, and it had to be a 5 or 6 pounder. And then in parentheses here, he writes, I promise it was not a 2.5 pounder, and my eyes had just adjusted to dink mode. And then he says, after catching 100 plus small bass with so little size variation, I'd never thought a big one like that would be in there. Thanks for all your work, Scott. Does every body of water have a big fish in it? No, definitely not. But I do think there are more bodies of water than you think that do have surprisingly good fish in them. So for your example, an 8-acre pond, that's plenty big enough to hold a wide variety of fish and different like generations of fish. So that 5 to 6 pounder you saw cruising the bank obviously was probably from a generation from before those stunted fish that you're catching, those dink fish. That happens a lot. Those fish are from a generation where there wasn't so much competition in that body of water. They did have a chance to get bigger. And then as bass procreated and more fish are in there competing for the same food source, and nobody is in there selectively harvesting that body of water, then you start to see over time that body of water have a lot more fish in it and they're smaller. But the 5 to 6 pounder you saw was probably, 10, 15 years old from before that pond got stunted would be my guess. But no, not every pond or every body of water has big fish in it. There are plenty of bodies of water that you could drain, down to nothing, and you would be surprised to find that there is not like a giant lurking in there. So no, I don't think that's the case all the time, but in your case, like with that Airbnb pond, yes, there definitely have the chance to be big fish in a pond that seems to be stunted like that. And there's probably a pretty good chance that that 5 to 6 pounder that you saw is smarter than those other 1.5, 2 pound bass. So there's a reason that you're not catching it. It has lived that long and survived in that competitive of an ecosystem by being smarter and selective and knowing what to eat and what not to eat. And it's been around the block a few more times. So yeah, great question. Yes, there are surprise fish in some of those ponds, especially if it is a pond that the stuntedness, I guess, of that pond is relatively recent. You have some fish from before that problem started that could still be in there. All right, and our last question here for the day is from John, who says, hello, here's a question. How much emphasis do you put on the physical weight of your rod when you're considering purchasing a new rod, casting, or spinning? I try to keep my rods under 100 grams for a medium and under 75 grams for an ultralight, but hopefully more. I find that this is the main characteristic I consider upon purchase. It tells me how much R&D to the materials were used in the design and performance. It is interesting how many upper-end rod manufacturers do not list the rod weights, St. Croix, for example, which is interesting. Sincerely, John. Okay, so yes and no, right? I do put some weight into the weight of the rods that I'm purchasing, but the other half of that is how does it balance in your hand, specifically with the reel that you're going to put on it. Just because a rod is heavier on a scale does not mean that it is going to feel worse in your hand with the reel that you're going to pair up with it. Same thing goes for the opposite side. If a rod is lighter on the scale, it does not mean that it will be automatically a better feeling rod in your hand. A good example would be Dobyns. Dobyns rods are not going to be the lightest rods when you put them on a scale, but I think over the years, Gary did a pretty darn good job of balancing those rods to make sure they didn't feel as heavy in your hand as they actually are on the scale. But with that being said, lately I have been so impressed with these rod companies and how light their rods are out of the box. A lot of these companies that used to have some pretty heavy rods have got with the program and have lightened up those rods. And some of them I feel like have gotten too light. I think there are some companies that swung the pendulum too far one way. And now I think that durability is suffering because they tried to go so light. So they're just trying to get that number that you see in the specs down, and the rod itself suffers for it. But yeah, I think there is something to be said for the objective weight of a rod. That is something that you don't have to go to a store, you don't have to pick up. You can do your research online and you can find what those rods weigh. Now, I will say I have plenty of rods that the listed weight and then the weight that I actually get when I put them on the scale are two different weights. So you do have to take their weight with a grain of salt sometimes, or maybe my scale is wrong. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think my scale is pretty spot on. And there are going to be slight differences sometimes from the listed weight to the actual weight that you have on that scale. All right, everybody, that is our episode today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate you all. As always, if you want to keep up with us, you can go to www.tackletalkpodcast.com. There, you can submit a mailbag question. You can vote in next week's fishing poll. If there's anything that I can help with in the meantime, feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram or Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. You can email me, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. I try my best to get to all of those. If there is a delay in the reply, I apologize, but I promise I do try and get to as many of those as possible. Again, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. And I'll see you guys right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.